Good evening. I'd like to officially open this evening by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which we meet today, the Ngunnawal people. I pay my respects to the elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here this evening. I'd also like to acknowledge a few representatives and special guests we have here this evening. Representing Palestine, the Ambassador of the State of Palestine, Mr. Izzat Abu Hadi, and his wife Zaina Abu Hadi. Representing Lebanon, Ambassador Milad Raad. Representing Morocco, Ambassador Karim Medrek and his wife Fatin Medrek. I'd also like to acknowledge Dr. Kevin Bray, Chair of ajpp, who is the host this evening. Chair of a president. This is who we want as our president of Palestine one day. So, you know, if there was any doubt in anyone's mind of the work and the importance of the doctor's work and the gift that he has given Palestinians, it really, it says everything to me about how important the work is. So I'd like to ask you to please give your full attention, and I'd like to welcome Doctor up here to speak. Thank you. Would you stand?
Can I see everybody? Yes. Thank you, Jackie. You have been eloquent in describing so many things, which saved me the time to repeat them. Thank you very much for being here tonight. I am, of course, very delighted to meet all of you and my listeners. And I thank you also not only for being here tonight, but who you are, because who you are is the reason I'm here. That means you have the conscience and the support for Palestine, which is long way away from here, both in geography and even in years of contact. I always value the people who act according to their conscience. I tell people in England and other places, I am here for Palestine because I am selfish. I have a home which I lost, and I spent my life trying to get it. But you don't have to do that. You actually support Palestine because you have a conscience. You have a commitment to justice. You say, the death of one man, as the poet Foster said, the death of one man limits me. Therefore, the suffering of one man or woman anywhere in the world limits me, limits my humanity. And Nelson Mandela, of course, said that our freedom in South Africa will never be complete without the freedom for Palestinians. So here we are talking to a lot of people, mostly the old faithful. Maybe we gained few new people, but at least we have a base to start from. The first lecture I made in Adelaide, it was in commemoration of Edward Said. Let me tell you a few words about Edward Said. I have a very good friend named Professor Ibrahim Abu Lughod, and he is a very good friend of Edward Said. They both immigrated to the United States in the early 50s, and they had some communication between them from time to time. But the big shock came in 1967. I was in Canada at the time, teaching at Western University, and we had big thunderbolt in 1967. All the 16 years before, we were planning how we can get back to Jaffa and Haifa and Al-Jalil, Galilee, and so on. Now this great shock came that the rest of Palestine is lost. And even some parts of Arab countries, all Sinai and the Golan Heights, has lost. It was an unbelievable shock. And when you really, in the last 16 years from 1967, before 1948, all our plans was how to rebuild Palestine and how to go back in this direction. Now we are pushed the opposite direction. Moreover, living in the Western countries at the time, they were imbued by Zionist narrative to a great extent, and we were the victim, absent from any narrative, absolutely absent. We were, I mean, I could say, bleeding in the heart when we saw people in London and New York dancing in the streets at our defeat, at our land which was occupied. And that was unbelievable shock. How could ignorance of the people against us would lead to that? How come the victim and the aggressor changed places? They were the victim and we were the aggressor, while in fact it's just the opposite. So what we decided as being university graduates, we formed Arab American University Graduates in United States and in Canada. The mover behind this was Professor Ibrahim Abulod. And he told me later, we all joined that, and we tried to help in many ways. We spoke to churches and communities, Rotary clubs, and so on. But the main thing was, Ibrahim said, we have to create this Arab American University Graduates, and we have to help the Western public to know about Palestine. So he selected some of his friends in universities. You write about economics, you write about politics. He said, well, let me ask Edward. Edward is, professor of literature, comparative literature. So let me ask him to write a paper about the image of the Arabs and Muslims in the Western eyes. And Ibrahim told me, I saw him just before he died in Ramallah in 2000, about the beginning of 2001 and 2. He told me Edward was away. And I said, we lost Edward. But he came after 3 months. He said, I changed my flat apartment address and I didn't get your message except now. But he came with a paper, and Ibrahim told me it's the most eloquent paper ever read by him. And he's professor at Princeton. Edward then became part of the Palestinian struggle, very much so. And he worked on his paper so much, and he developed it. 10 years later from that date, 1978, the book Orientalism was published. So that's the germ of the idea came. And since then, Edward, with us, all of us, in any activity. We held conferences in Boston, first one in the year 2000, about the right of return. Before that, we had a petition, or actually a declaration, signed by 1,000 Palestinians all over the world, not only in Europe and America, everywhere, criticizing Oslo because it dropped the main building stone of our case, namely the right of return. So we were all against it. Anyway, so that is the story, how until he died, he sent me a message. I think I read it in your lecture. He sent me a message saying, I'm very ill, and I think and suppose I can write, but keep on doing that. And sadly, he passed away 1 month before our next conference. Now, back to Australia. I keep saying that. I'm sure you are tired of hearing me say that. I never came to Australia before, but Australia came to me. Australia came to me twice. One in 1917, my father told me about it, and in 1940. In 1917, the Anzacs, after failing to get Gaza twice, someone had the brilliant idea of going to Beersheba from the east. And so they started from my land, from Al Ma'in. Anyone who saw the maps this afternoon, you say they started from Abu Sitta land. And they went, of course, east and through the Wadi of Saba. Anyway, they took Beersheba on the night of 31st of October, 1917. And as you probably, I'm sure you know, my father told me that 1 year before, they were all full of hope because the Allied forces asked their support in the war, and they said, if you support us, then you will be free and independent. But my father did not know that at this very same time, were they hoping and adding the Allied and getting rid of the Turkish influence, at this very same time, two plots were hatched against him. One of them, man called Mark Sykes, and a Frenchman called Georges Picot, Francois Picot, they were huddled in a room with the map of the Middle East between them, dividing this piece of cake for me, this is for you, and we were under the impression that when the war is over, we'll all be free. But the worst thing for us, not only for other Arab areas, for us, that when the victory in Beersheba reached London, Balfour declared his declaration, which all of you know is the promise of those who do not own to those who do not deserve in the absence of the right owner of the country. But this morning I spent a few hours, thanks for your help, looking at the reports of the fourth light horseman. Every place they mention is known to me, Not only that, 30 years later, I was in a boarding school in Beersheba itself. And my school was so stone's throw, as I say, from the place where the Anzacs hoisted the British flag and lowered the Turkish flag, which ended 1,400 years of Muslim rule of the Muslim lands and Arab lands from China to Spain. That ended after 1,400 years under one government, whether it's called Ottoman or Abbasid or Umayyad and so on, and you know these names. So, I mean, that was a big shock. But even in my own lifetime, I have seen shocks like that. Again, near to my school, within less than a block away, was the cemetery of the Anzacs, the first cemetery ever in Palestine. And on it, there is a plaque which says, this land of the cemetery where soldiers were interned, 33 of them, is a gift from the people of Palestine. Gift from the people of Palestine, donated by the Beersheba municipality. Fine, they have done job, and we are all together for freedom. But many of you have seen, almost 70 years later, or less than that, the celebration by the Australians of that event. Fine, so far it's fine. But with whom? They were celebrating this event with the Israelis. The Australian ambassador joined this celebration, and she said, I am so proud to be here in an Israeli city of Beersheba. All my life, all our history, Beersheba is a Palestinian city. So where are the people of Palestine in this celebration? Where are they? Sorry? The Prime Minister of Australia. Yes, but I have listed the event of the celebration with the Australian light horsemen. And you expect that in this event of celebration of victory, you join the event with people who shared that event for you. Nobody ever mentioned that the mayor of Beersheba, Sheikh Free Hamuddin, has a great role played in the victory of Anzacs. And in fact, I showed you today the order of the British Empire, he was awarded for that. And he was not mentioned. Of course, recently, there should be someone, his successor, or the Palestinian new mayor of Beersheba. But who responded to these honors? Who responded to the honor in 1917 of victory, joined by Palestinians and Australians. No, a guy from Poland. Poland, his name is Volodovich or something like that. He is the one who answered the Australian. I mean, if that is not a forgery, it's a hijacking of history. It's deception of history. But what annoyed me more, that the Rabbi, Raymond something, he is the Rabbi of the Australian Defense Forces. He was present in the meeting. And what he said was, Israel deserves Nobel Prize for its unstinting humanity. I mean, I imagine, when you read that, your blood goes into your head, and you say, how come in this age where we have computers and knowledge, and you have CIA and all these things, how come people denied to know this? And this I address to you, because you, like me, have been deceived and cheated by that. Now, the history which followed, of course, is well known to you. But the subject matter of all this is needed to bring attention to the right of return. If we lived in Palestine, as we're supposed to do, we would have a pleasant, low-key celebration, finished. But now, this celebration should bring to mind that all of us have a duty to correct that situation. What is this situation? What is this tragedy? It's the worst and the biggest tragedy ever fell to Palestine in its 5,000 years history. How can you imagine the population of 550,000 villages in Palestine to be depopulated completely by a foreign force organized in the West, but made basically from the Jewish militia who came from Europe to us, and they were 120,000 soldiers. Their officers are veterans of Second World War from the Red Army. Gaza Strip was saved by the defeat of that general, Russian general, leading the attack on Gaza. And they come from anywhere in Europe, from America, from everywhere. So this foreign invasion has taken place, and I am the victim of it, before Israel was established. On 14th of May 1948, the Haganah attacked my place with 24 armored vehicles and soldiers and so on. We had nothing. We were 15 young people having old rifles. So they took our land, and they also depopulated 220 Palestinian villages before Israel was established and before any Arab soldier comes to help them. And certainly, unfortunately, and tragically, while the British were there supposedly to protect us. But they didn't. So, on the 14th of May, 1948, Ben Gurion stood in front of his Polish settlers and told them, we have finished the first phase of the conquest of Palestine. We now declare the state of Israel. And on that day, by coincidence, I also became a refugee on that very day. And then, of course, the Israeli forces took 78% of Palestine. Of these 78% of Palestine, not 1 acre, not 1 meter, not 1 kilometer was taken under international law. It's all by brute force. Until today, Israel today has no borders. It says so officially. Israel has no borders. Also, international law says Israel has no borders. The lines mentioned in maps are simply called the armistice lines. Armistice line, by definition, are the lines in which the forces attacking one part or another stops. So the United Nations say stop, and they call this armistice line. The armistice line, which bounds, for example, what's called Israel with the West Bank and with Gaza, this, in Article 2 of the agreement, it says very clearly it has no legal value. It doesn't give any rights to any party by this conquest. Even today, the property of population of 500,000 villages is still held by Israel in custody. not one Israeli today owns a title deed that the place he lives in is his own. They are all taken over by what's called Israel Land Administration and rented to the kibbutz on a 99-year load. So neither the Israel has the right to take this land, nor it's legally, according to its own laws, owns this. Neither it has sovereignty of the land. Certainly not the ownership of the land. And anyone of you follows the United Nations will find in November of each year, when the session of the United Nations takes place, there is a resolution called Refugees Revenue. Israel is ordered to keep record of the property it takes and the revenue from that. And this is, of course, quite correct according to international law, because with the exception of 6% of Palestine taken over by the Zionist settlers in Palestine during the British Mandate, the 78%, as I said, none of it is taken under any international law. It's still held like that. So when we say that things are happening all the time, and don't be deceived by the latest episode of the story. You can never solve the problem unless you have a diagnosis of the problem. As you go to a doctor, you say, I have cold. He doesn't give you aspirin. He has to see why you have cold. And the case in Palestine is the same. The case in Palestine is very simple in one word. It's not a state given to this and that. It's not removing the occupation, however this is important. It is not any of these things. It is simply that a population of a whole country have been uprooted completely and replaced by other people. And those who are uprooted are not a minority. They are 13 million now, and there will be 18 and 50 million, and they have no reason and have no intention of giving up their rights. How could you pluck people out, Syria and Lebanon there, Egypt here, Transjordan here, or Jordan here, and then you say this vacuum is held in the natural land of people in the shtetl, in Poland, in Russia. They came recently to take it. And where are the people of the land? Who built 2,000 towns and villages? You know, I just tell you one thing. I looked up a book, actually it's a map, by Bishop Eusebius in the Byzantine area of Palestine in the year 313. And this man wrote a book in Greek and Latin aimed at pilgrims visiting Jerusalem, telling them these are the names of the villages. You go there, 1 day's horse ride, 2 days horse ride. It's a guideline, travel book in the year 313, not 1,313, only 313. So we got that book, and we got to translate it, not me, friends in London. And then I compared this with the atlas I prepared of the villages. You have no idea. There is no place in the world like this. You find, of course, Bethlehem, Nazareth, and Ramah, and Kafr this and Kafr that. The same names we have until Nakba was printed in a book 1,700 years ago. This book is actually mentioned and compared with the modern maps in the Atlas. How can you approach people like that? How can you leave that situation? I mean, I know it is just an ideal analogy, but Jesus Christ must have walked in these villages. I'm sure he must have. And they actually preceded him. How could the people of these villages now are considered to be strangers? They're called terrorists when they try to get home. While those who made them homeless and did the crime are sitting there in the world, and unfortunately in some Western countries, being the rightful owner of the country. I mean, I don't want to continue because you are here because you know a lot about that. But what I want to conclude by saying, the right of return is not a gift to anybody. It is an alienable right, which means nobody, no leader, no government can actually forfeit it. And why is it so? It is it is in Article 13 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Why did this Universal Declaration of Human Rights was accepted and passed by the United Nations? The reason is clear. In 1945, the European countries, 55 of them, formed the new United Nations. And they said, well, we lost 30 or 40 million people in the Second World War killed. So that gives us a basic lesson that war doesn't solve problems. Therefore, we have to have a new system called international law. So they passed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was passed on 10th of December, 1948. In the next day, on the 11th of December, they passed a resolution 194 calling for the return of the refugees to their homes. And they never stopped. Every year they do that. It's the longest standing in history. So the situation in Palestine is that Palestinians have been uprooted, and they are, generation after generation, they want to go back, which I have tried to explain. It's not only sacred to them, but it's also legal, and it's also possible. I add one more quality, it's also inevitable. So the passage of 70 years, look at it as this. It's 70 times the Palestinians never given up. If we wait another 10 years, it's also 80 times we never given up. And the answer is really to go back to the root of problem and apply basic, simple principles of justice. You have no right to uproot people from their homes, and they insist all the time, forever, generation after generation, even at the risk of being killed daily, weekly, at the barbed wire by Israel with snipers. They will never give up. And the answer is only the right of return. I hope you keep supporting that, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sitta, for your talk. And I just wondered if you could say a little more about what keeps the hopes and aspirations of the Palestinians up, because it's very difficult advocacy work to do, as I'm sure you're fully aware after all these decades. So could you say a little more about the hopes of the Palestinian people, and perhaps what more we can do to promote the rights of the Palestinian people?
I don't think we will have nuclear arms or F-16s or armies in the near future. I hope it doesn't come to that. But you have a weapon which nobody ever can defeat: your conscience and your insistence on the right thing to do. You may think this is a small thing. No, it is not. It is, I keep saying, it's like holding a little candle in the darkness of campaign against us. Little candle has light, but more and more candles can have enough light, which will reveal the truth and reveal the justice. Nobody can actually maintain injustice for a long time. Your job, your conscience tells you that you have to uphold that. Never give up. Make organizations. Talk to people. You can say that in a legal, in a democratic country, you can say, you are doing this policy not in my name. I do not want to aid the criminals. I want to aid the victim. And if you don't do that, you don't represent me. And in a democracy, this could grow into a larger movement. The apartheid in South Africa was, terminated by the opinion of the world. There was no war in there. What you can do is, like BDS, for example, it's growing all the time. I see in England and even in Europe that many young people, even their families are Jewish, they actually see that there is something wrong there. When they discover the injustice, they are supportive of Palestine. So my advice is, however little you think your opinion is, it is not little. The accumulation of these opinions will actually create a force nobody can resist. Let us remember that even in the world today, 173 countries are definitely on the side of Palestine. And the remainder, one day this and one day that. So we are in the majority. The majority doesn't have to be the one which has the biggest arms. The majority has to be this. We, the people of the world, live in this world, and we cannot accept injustice to be done in our world, destroy our world in our name. And that voice, the important thing is it should be continued. They always try to discourage you. Say, what can you do? No, we can always say we want justice to be made and we'll never give up. Palestinians certainly never give up. So please do not underestimate your conscience and your effort. I hope you multiply that very much.
Doctor, very grateful for your address. You've given a perspective that I've not really heard before. My first question is an engineering degree the basic form of education for every Palestinian? But my more serious question is, earlier this year I went to stay with Palestinians in Israel for the first time. Many, many times I've been with Palestinians on the West Bank, but never before in Israel. And it dawned on me, which should have dawned a long time before, that the issue we're talking about is for Palestinians in Israel, on the West Bank, and the ones who are refugees with the right of return. We're not simply talking about a problem on the West Bank and Gaza. Or would you like to say something about that? Is there just one issue which is to do with all Palestinians, or are we talking about Palestinians in certain sectors?
About engineering, you know that of the saying, the invention, the necessity is the mother of invention. And in Gaza, they do wonderful things. They only have kites, like the ones I played with as a child. And when they have these kites, they go over the barbed wire, very easy, and they hang things, Palestine, return home, right of return. And the settlers there are very annoyed. Then someone discovered that you could have a can of Coca-Cola and put some oil in it and light it. And then they fly this kite, and it falls on the wheat field, and it burns the wheat field. Here's a weapon. I had occasion to know a settler in my own land, not only in my own land, but on my father's land, in Nirim. Her name is Adele Raemer. She has a blog. She writes about the suffering of the kibbutz from the kites. That's her complaint. The kites are very annoying. And this lady, I discovered, she is a settler coming from Bronx, not very long time ago, 1970. And she's sitting in my home, and she claiming that she owner of my home, and writing blogs all over, saying that the Palestinians or Palestinian refugees are attacking us. They are the terrorists. Why? They said, she is burning my wheat fields. I wrote to her back and said, sorry, these are my wheat fields. And I remember as a child, I was sitting, they would let me sit on a harvester combine in these fields. So I have a little part in harvesting my own fields. And so actually you get that. But coming back to your question, the problem of, the issue of Palestinians is the same, whether they are West Bank or 1948 or something. Let me remind you of the report issued by the United Nations in April 2017, written by very well-known legal experts, Richard Falk and Virginia Telley. And this report says, Israel is an apartheid state. And who are its victims? All Palestinians. They are victims as citizens of Israel under apartheid law. They are victims in the West Bank and Gaza, including Jerusalem, because they are subject of occupation. And we, outside Palestine, are also victims because of our apartheid laws, we are not allowed to return back. So the issue is one, but we have to tackle it in each place according to the situation. But apartheid state of Israel, and of course what follows from that, racism and discrimination, those who live in Israel, 1948 Israel, they know they are under subject of 55 laws which discriminate against them as citizens of Israel. So the story is very long, but I keep saying, let us not digress in these things. We have to come back with one fact, that people expelled from their homes against international law, against logic, against reality in the ground, must return home, and this is the answer to everything. Now, people tell me, would you like it to be one state or two states or something? I keep telling them all the time, without hesitation, I don't care. All I care about is about the person returning to his home in his land in freedom and democracy, right? Because this is an inalienable right, right? When people live in their homes under this umbrella, I don't care what they make it. They can make it part of Australia if they like. They can do anything as long as the person is living there under freedom. So let us not get bogged down in detail and insist on the basic right, which is the only solution to the big tragedy of Palestine. Right?
Yeah. In the syllabus of some political science courses, we used to read writings by what were called revisionist historians, who were Jews, and possibly sometimes even Israelis, who denounced and discredited the theory, the Zionist theory of people without land, who settled in a land without people. So how strong and influential that line of thought was, and does it still exist?
Yes, it is very strong, and it's increasing. Ilan Pape is one of them. He's a good friend of mine. He wrote so many books about that, and his distinction of writing is not that he said something we didn't know. We knew all that. But his distinction that he is an Israeli, a professor at Haifa University, and he looked up the documents, the Israeli archives, which are slowly being opened. By the way, they are now reversing the process. They are still hiding some of that. So he just wrote about the documents as an honest historian. Another one called Avi Shleim is now professor history at Oxford University. He wrote about that. There are many Israelis who are honest enough to write about that. But to me, the most important thing is their writings to whom it reached. I think in America at least, I know in England as well, that young American Jews actually read that. And when I speak there, sometimes a large percentage, maybe up to 1/3 of my audience are young American Jews. They say, we have not been told that. It's a crime. I know young American Jews who went back to West Bank and lived in a refugee camp to see how it is. And they went back and worked on that. The students of justice in Palestine in American universities are large number of them are American Jews, because they are young people, their mind is fresh, and they find the facts. And so, of course, there are people like Benny Morris. He is still a Zionist historian. You know, one of the funny things he said in his book, wrote a book about the origin of the refugee problem. He made another edition larger of this. He describes the crimes, the massacres done by the soldiers, one after the other, in detail, their names and their this and that, and every occasion, and he describes that in detail. Then the end comes with the conclusion that was an accident of war. It was not meant. It was not deliberate. How can you describe the sequence of massacres in different places, different times, continuously in the same way, and you call it an accident? Accident, by definition, is something that's not repeat itself. But let me add one thing, since you are ambassador of Lebanon. I am happy to announce that Palestine Land Society has agreed with the American University of Beirut to establish a center for Palestine land studies based on our archives and our work. And it will start, the inauguration will be in a month or two. You're welcome to come when you are in Lebanon. Thank you.
Alas. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, well, mains are served, so Sahatan.